Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. When I was at university in 2020, I started dating this guy named Jake. Initially, he was incredible, focused on his studies, entertaining company, thoughtful, and always planning little surprises for me while maintaining a steady job at a local tech store. "Sarah, you won't believe what I got us for Friday," he'd say, pulling out tickets to my favorite band or reservations at that new restaurant I'd been dying to try. Then, piece by piece, everything fell apart. First, he started missing lectures. Soon, he barely showed up at all. What made it worse was his complete disregard for our shared living space. The dishes piled up, laundry remained unwashed, and the flat was a constant mess. He even lost his job at the tech store after repeatedly failing to show up for shifts. "Sorry, babe, I just couldn't make it in today. Too tired," became his standard excuse. All he did was lounge around playing PS5 or scroll through Reddit and Discord all day. This was a far cry from the motivated person I'd first met. This meant I had to pick up extra waitressing shifts, sometimes working morning, afternoon, and evening, while maintaining my course load and studying. Later, I discovered this was his typical pattern. He'd become intensely passionate about something, then lose interest completely, reverting to his lazy habits. Eventually, he'd find a new obsession, and the cycle would continue. "Just give me time," he'd say. "I'm figuring things out." I should have ended it much earlier, but I kept hoping he'd snap out of it. Maybe it was the pressure of final year getting to him. I desperately wanted our relationship to return to how it was during those first few months. But reality had other plans. I caught him with Amy from his study group and kicked him out. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered, but we both knew exactly what it was. I was so overwhelmed that I didn't think about our joint savings account until the next day. We had just over £5,000 saved. Mostly my money from working those endless shifts, with only a few hundred from him. When I checked the account, my heart sank. It was empty. Jake had emptied the account and moved in with Amy. My conversation with the bank was futile. "I'm sorry, Miss Cooper, but as it's a joint account, both parties have equal access to the funds," they explained. The police were equally unhelpful, explaining that since it was a joint account, no crime had been committed. They mentioned civil court, but warned about the legal fees likely exceeding any potential recovery. Jake had stolen £5,000, and I was powerless to stop him. My blood boiled when I saw his social media posts showing off his new gaming setup, latest PlayStation 5, high-end monitors, and other expensive gadgets, all purchased with my hard-earned money. "Check out my new gaming paradise." He bragged online, showcasing everything he'd bought with my savings. I'm typically not vindictive. Petty, sometimes, but I'd never felt such a strong desire for revenge until then, and I knew exactly how to execute it. During my university summers, I worked various temp jobs to fund my studies. One particular position at a debt collection agency, though unpleasant, paid exceptionally well for the 3 months I was there. Jake had been evading his debts for years and boasted about it frequently. He was particularly smug about nearly reaching statute-barred status, meaning he hadn't paid anything toward his debts in almost 6 years. In the UK, creditors have roughly 6 years to collect a debt before it becomes statute-barred. The debt remains, but becomes legally unenforceable. What many don't realize is that any payment, no matter how small, resets this 6-year countdown. "These collection agencies can't touch me," he'd often brag. "Just a few more months and I'm home free?" Previously, I'd used my industry knowledge to help him avoid these debts. Now, I would use it against him. By the end of our relationship, I managed everything, including his debt correspondence. I had all the paperwork detailing his creditors and amounts owed. I contacted each one, honestly identifying myself as a friend making payments on his behalf. While they couldn't share account details, they could accept payments. I paid the minimum possible on each debt, mostly £1, though one required £1.50. Best £8.50 I've ever spent. I also provided them his new address and his parents' contact information. From my industry experience, I knew they wouldn't update the address based on my call, but they'd note it in their systems for cross-referencing. Now I just had to wait. Several months passed before his social media tone changed dramatically. His posts shifted from showing off his expensive gaming setup to panicking about an upcoming court date. "Sarah, please," he called me, desperate. "I need your help with this court stuff." "Go to hell, Jake," I replied, and hung up. When I wouldn't help, he sought advice online. Some clueless forum user told him to skip the court date, claiming they couldn't proceed without him present. This completely false advice played perfectly into my plan. The court date passed, and predictably, Jake was a no-show. Weeks later, he posted photos of his stripped-bare apartment. The bailiffs had taken everything, all those shiny new gadgets and toys he'd bought with my money. He also received multiple CCJs, county court judgments, which severely impact credit ratings and make it nearly impossible to get anything beyond basic bank accounts. Getting a mortgage became a pipe dream, and most landlords wouldn't touch him due to the high risk. Financial sector jobs were now completely out of reach. "I can't believe this is happening," he posted. "They took everything. The cherry on top? Amy left him once the nice things disappeared and his true financial situation became clear. I never recovered my pound 5K, but watching everything he bought with my money being hauled away was worth every penny he stole." For context about his age and debt, Jake started at my university at 25. He'd previously attended a different university at 18, but dropped out at 19 to work. Later, his parents agreed to fund a business degree. He had dreams of becoming an entrepreneur. As for any age gap concerns, I'd taken a gap year to travel before university, so I was 22 when we started dating, and he was 26. The next one is an entitled People's Story. I never thought I'd be writing this, but after 3 years of legal battles, I can finally share how an overzealous homeowner association tried to destroy my family's farm and ended up paying dearly for it. This is a long one, so buckle up. I'm a third-generation farmer in Midwestern state. My grandparents bought this 120-acre property back in 1947, and we've been growing corn, soybeans, and raising cattle here ever since. Our farm sits about 2 miles outside of town, and until recently, we were surrounded by other farms and open land. About 5 years ago, a developer bought the property adjacent to our eastern border and built a fancy subdivision called Oakwood Estates. These weren't your typical suburban homes. We're talking million-dollar McMansions with perfectly manicured lawns. The developer tried to buy our land too, but I refused. This farm is my heritage, and I wasn't about to sell it to become another cookie-cutter housing development. The problem started when Karen, yes, that's her real name, became the Homeowner Association president of Oakwood Estates. She'd moved from California and apparently couldn't stand looking at an actual working farm from her back porch. The first time I met her was when she marched onto my property one morning while I was fixing my tractor. "Excuse me," she said, nose wrinkled like she'd smelled something offensive, probably the manure we'd just spread on the fields. "I'm Karen Mitchell, president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your property's condition." I wiped my hands on my coveralls and tried to be polite. "I'm Jim. How can I help you?" She pulled out a tablet and started reading from what looked like a list. "Your property is in violation of multiple homeowner association regulations. The height of your corn exceeds our maximum vegetation height requirements. Your equipment storage is unsightly. The cattle are creating offensive odors, and the roosters are disturbing residents' sleep. We're giving you 30 days to remedy these violations." I actually laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Ma'am, I'm not part of your homeowner association. This farm has been here for over 70 years, long before your subdivision existed." Karen's face turned red. "All properties in this area must comply with homeowner association standards. We'll be fining you $100 per day until these violations are addressed." I shook my head. "That's not how this works. My property isn't in your jurisdiction. I suggest you check your documentation." She stormed off, but that was just the beginning. Over the next few months, I received multiple violation notices in my mailbox. I ignored them all since they had no legal authority over my farm. Then they started calling the county with noise complaints, odor complaints, and even tried to report me for environmental violations, all of which were dismissed because we follow all agricultural regulations. The situation escalated when Karen convinced some homeowner association members to start harassing my customers. We have a small farm stand where we sell fresh produce, eggs, and beef. They would park their luxury SUVs blocking the entrance and tell potential customers that our products were unsafe and unregulated. I consulted with a lawyer who sent them a cease and desist letter. They ignored it. I installed security cameras after finding nails scattered in my driveway one morning. The footage showed 2 homeowner association board members doing it at 3 a.m., but when I reported it to the police, Karen claimed they were investigating suspicious activity. Then came the day that changed everything. I had to attend my nephew's college graduation 2 states away. I left my farm manager, Mike, in charge and drove off early Friday morning. When I returned Sunday evening, I couldn't believe my eyes. The entire section of my farm closest to Oakwood Estates, about 15 acres, had been bulldozed. My corn crop was destroyed. The historic barn where we stored equipment was demolished. The fence for the cattle pasture was torn down. Thank God Mike had moved the cattle to the back pasture that weekend for rotation. I called the police immediately. When they arrived, Karen and several homeowner association board members were there with a document they claimed gave them authority to abate violations. It was completely fabricated. They had forged county letterhead and signatures. Mike showed the police our security footage. It showed 3 construction vehicles with Oakwood Estates maintenance logos arriving Saturday morning. Karen was there directing the whole operation. The police arrested her and 2 other board members for criminal destruction of property, trespassing, and forgery. But the story doesn't end there. I hired the best agricultural law firm in the state and sued both the homeowner association and each board member individually. During discovery, we found emails proving they knew perfectly well that they had no authority over my property. They had specifically discussed ways to force the eyesore out of the neighborhood. Even better, we discovered that Karen had used homeowner association funds to pay for the demolition without board approval, violating their own bylaws. She had convinced a few board members to go along with her plan by claiming she had county approval, but most had no idea what she'd done. The homeowner association's insurance initially tried to deny coverage, claiming the actions were criminal and therefore not covered. But our lawyers argued successfully that the homeowner association was liable for the actions of its officers and the policy had to pay. Here's how the damages broke down. $145,000 for the destroyed crops, including future losses. $180,000 for the historic barn. $89,000 for equipment damage. $40,000 for fencing and land restoration. $80,000 in punitive damages total. $534,000 plus legal fees. The judge was particularly harsh in his ruling, noting that this was one of the most egregious abuses of homeowner association authority he'd ever seen. Karen and 2 other board members were convicted of criminal charges, receiving suspended sentences and hefty fines. They were also banned from serving on any homeowner association board in the state. The aftermath was spectacular. Most of the homeowner association board resigned. The Oakwood Estates residents voted to completely replace their leadership. The new board president, a retired judge who had opposed Karen's actions from the start, came to apologize personally and helped establish clear boundaries between our properties. The homeowner association also had to take out a special assessment to pay for their increased insurance premiums, costing each homeowner several $1,000s. Many residents put their homes up for sale, unable to afford the additional costs. Karen herself had to sell her house and move away after her husband divorced her. Apparently, this wasn't the first time she'd pulled something like this. But the best part, the publicity from this case led to our state legislature passing a new law, dubbed the Farm Protection Act, which specifically prohibits homeowner associations from attempting to regulate agricultural properties that predate their establishment. Several other states are now considering similar legislation. As for our farm, we're doing better than ever. We used part of the settlement money to modernize our equipment and expand our organic certification. The new homeowner association, residents have actually become some of our best customers. Turns out people like having access to fresh, local produce right next door. We even started a community-supported agriculture CSA program that's now got a waiting list. Last week, I ran into one of the former board members who had opposed Karen's plans at our farm stand. She told me that Karen had recently tried to join an homeowner association board in her new city, but was rejected after a simple Google search revealed her history. Karma really does come around. Some of the more amusing moments from the legal proceedings deserve mention. During her deposition, Karen actually tried to argue that her actions were justified because our roosters crowing violated her constitutional right to peaceful enjoyment of her property. The lawyer's response? He played a recording of the highway traffic noise from her backyard, which was significantly louder than any farm sounds. Another board member broke down and admitted they knew they had no authority over our farm, but Karen had convinced them that if they created enough problems, we'd eventually sell. He showed emails where Karen had already contacted developers about purchasing the property once we gave up. She had even promised board members a kickback from the sale. The judge's comments during sentencing were particularly satisfying. He said, "In my 30 years on the bench, I've seen many cases of homeowner association overreach, but this is the first time I've seen one attempt to literally bulldoze their way to compliance. The arrogance and entitlement displayed here is staggering." One detail that came out during the trial really showed how far they'd gone to try to justify their actions. They had actually hired someone to Photoshop pictures of my property, making it look far worse than it was to submit with their fake violation notices. The person they hired came forward and provided all the original photos, showing our well-maintained farm in its true state. The whole experience taught me some valuable lessons about standing up for your rights and the importance of documentation. Those security cameras I installed proved crucial. Without that footage, it would have been much harder to prove what happened. I've since upgraded to a comprehensive security system that covers every inch of the property. I also learned the value of community support. During the legal battle, neighboring farmers offered to help with our harvest, and local residents organized a boycott of businesses owned by homeowner association board members who had supported Karen's actions. The local newspaper ran several supportive editorials, and we even had people drive from hours away to buy from our farm stand as a show of solidarity. The incident has become something of a local legend. Every now and then, someone will stop by the farm stand and ask if this is the place that took down the crazy homeowner association lady. We've even had law students from the state university visit to study the case as part of their property law coursework. Looking back, I'm glad we fought this battle, not just for ourselves, but for other farmers who might face similar situations as urban development encroaches on agricultural areas. The precedent set by this case has already helped several other farmers in similar situations. We've made some positive changes too. We installed a beautiful split-rail fence along the property line with Oakwood Estates, planted a row of fruit trees as a natural buffer, and even created an educational program where suburban kids can learn about farming. The new homeowner association leadership has embraced these changes, and we now collaborate on community events like harvest festivals and farmers markets. My grandfather always said that good fences make good neighbors, but sometimes you need good lawyers too. The farm he built is still here, stronger than ever, and now protected by both law and community support. Karen and her supporters learned an expensive lesson about respecting property rights and agricultural heritage. As for that bulldozed section of the farm, it's now our most productive field, growing organic heirloom vegetables that we sell at premium prices to high-end restaurants in the city. Every time I work that field, I think about how their attempt to destroy our farm ended up making it more successful than ever. The whole experience has become a powerful reminder that sometimes you have to stand your ground, literally, against those who would try to bully you off it. And while the financial settlement was substantial, the real victory was preserving a piece of agricultural heritage for future generations and showing that even the most powerful homeowner association isn't above the law. These days, when I see Karen's old house from my tractor, I can't help but smile. The new owners are lovely people who regularly buy our produce and even volunteered to help during last year's harvest. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning in court. It's showing that there's room for both old and new farms and subdivisions as long as there's mutual respect and understanding. And that rooster that Karen complained about, he's still crowing every morning, reminding everyone that this is and always will be a working farm. Some things shouldn't change no matter how many McMansions pop up next door. The next one is a petty revenge story. I recently discovered our neighbor, Ron, has been blaming us for his time limits, so we kept a party going. So we live beside the main parking area and access lane, which is common property, shared access, with Ron's accommodation business. This is a number of old buildings used for school camps, cheap weddings, and other events. Mostly Keogh's, he is a lazy tight arse who won't upgrade the dorms, etc. There are other properties beside us, but they are used as holiday homes. Recently, there was a high school music camp in during the week. Lots of bad practice, but a few good players practicing. The last night of the camp lights and a DJ setup appeared. When it started, my wife and I were talking about how good the music was. Late 70s, 80s, and early 90s dance music. Surprisingly, the kids were into it all. Since we used to hit the discos and clubs back in our youth, we decided to join in, put on our dancing gear, and wandered over. As expected, one of the teachers stopped us, so we told him they were on common property and we were members of the owner's corp, so he could not stop us. He then said that because they were school kids, we could not be near them. So we showed him our working with children cards. We volunteer at the local hospital, so have to have these. He just muttered something, photographed our cards, and said, okay. So, we were having a great time dancing and laughing with the teachers and kids, especially when the DJ played Nutbush City Limits. So we and a couple of teachers lined up to do the Nutbush, which then got plenty of the kids joining in. My wife signaled the moves to lead the dance, with most of the kids joining in eventually. Then, at 8.30, just as we were really getting into it, the DJ announced that they had to stop, or it would disturb the neighbors who would complain. I could see Ron looking over his balcony and couldn't help myself and yelled to the DJ, "Duck that, we're the neighbors, this is fun, keep going." Kids started saying keep going. DK looked at the teacher in charge. She shrugged and mouthed 9.30 as she gave the thumbs up. So the music and dancing kept going. Lots of kids thanked us, and Ron couldn't do a thing about it. Then for the last song, the school brass band got up with one girl on the mic. They started playing Feeling Good, Nina Simone, but the girl was a bit nervous. My wife loves that song and is a great singer, so raced up and asked the girl if she could join her. Up she gets, arm around the girl. They started again and she belts out the lyrics while encouraging the girl. She quickly gets over her nerves and they finished with a great duet. The band really got into the song with good singing too. Once they finish, my wife says, "Thanks for the great party, folks, and keep on enjoying your music." As we wandered home, the teacher started to run through logistics for the night and morning pack-up. We could see Ron glaring at us through his window. We hadn't had so much fun for a while. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I have been working in IT for the last 10 years. 4 of those in the company I am just leaving. I joined this company after a few bad experiences with coworkers and bosses. After getting to know some of the staff in the company, I was really happy about the coworkers and colleagues, because most of them seemed to be really friendly. Into my second year at the company, I felt like we were understaffed in IT. Not too bad still, I thought. That was up until our workload increased. Before we could handle the daily stuff and projects and on top could do some system upgrades over the year. Now we were getting more and more work due to new regulations from corporate and more software that needed to be supported. During this time, I started asking my team leader to look for a new guy. We needed more hands. After a year of bringing this up at least once per month, my boss started with his speech about, "You just need to prioritize your work." Of course, this would not help if the work is at like 110% of the load that the current team could handle. We increased our hours and could get it done, but that was only for half a year. At this point, I was done with this whole ordeal. Corporate IT got more and more hostile if you did not message some people directly, what was prohibited normally. And on top, I saw people left and right leaving. After around 3 years of being with the company, I saw our trainee leave. I talked to him about pay and why he wanted to leave. Not to deter him, but to understand his reasoning and show my support. And at that point, I have been passively looking for a job for about 6 months. I was at this time talking to my team leader and telling him that he needs to increase my salary by around 8% at least and bring more hands to the team. He was asking me why I wanted to leave. I told him about the problems that he knows and said that I can't bring myself to stay in this company with the problems the team is facing. I just need to prioritize myself. He did not react, unfortunately, but I think he got the point. As a side note, later I heard from my boss, basically the one above my team leader and me, that my team leader has never asked for more people. And to be honest, I want to trust this guy because he was sincere all the time as far as I know. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.